At the end of my session today, we're going to review some of the themes from yesterday's second session. How does that sound? So you won't have missed anything, okay? Okay, so I reward you for your persistence. So we'll be covering girls' education, and we're also going to do another path, okay? And if you were at another path yesterday, you get a second dose, okay? So if you really don't take that other path, I'll be terribly disappointed, okay? I come to you from another world. I mean, that's all I can say. It's completely different from Afghanistan, is so completely different than everything we see here in Qatar. A modern progressive state where women's rights are protected, the rights of girls and women are honored, and where we have a high level of participation in education at all levels. We have Education City here, which is a diamond in the entire region. Afghanistan has really never known peace for the last 25 to 30 years. And the education system is really in tatters, despite a massive investment by the international community. I'll be speaking about Afghanistan today, but I'm really speaking about girls and young women around the world. I also suggest to you that for everybody in this room, male or female, that there is no greater calling and no greater cause than investing in girls' education, and that you are needed, and your expertise, your intelligence, your skills, your passion, all these things are really, really valuable. And it relates really very much not just to an academic interest, but something which I think is here in each of us. My work has been working with really poor kids in the front lines of war, but also working children, street children, and children who live in the margins of urban society. Let's just start with some numbers so we have some idea of the challenges. And these are figures, the latest statistics from UNESCO, without being too didactic. There are 774 million illiterate adults over 15 years of age worldwide, 66% of whom are women, okay? Interesting, there are 123 million illiterate youth, 15 to 24 years of age worldwide, 66% of whom are female. The number of youth worldwide who cannot read or write is getting smaller, but the proportion of young illiterate women isn't. So we are making gains in terms of literacy for young people, but not so much for young women. 54 of the 76 million illiterate young women live in 9 countries. So we know where these young women are, okay? We know where we have to focus efforts. India, Pakistan, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Bangladesh, DRC, Tanzania, Egypt, and Burkina Faso. Okay? So we know exactly what the nations are, where the priorities are. Globally, 57 million children are currently out of school, of whom 50% will never enter a classroom. Around the world, 250 million children, whether they are enrolled in school or not, lack basic reading and writing skills. So even if they're going to school, they're not learning. So this tells us really interesting things. We're making gains with respect to illiteracy rates for young people, but not so much for women. So boys are doing better than young women. And we know that we still have a lot of work to do with respect to the 57 million kids around the world who are out of school, and also the fact that we have to change our curriculum and our teaching methods. Not to be too technical, but with respect to enrollment rates, we look at 3 different indicators at the United Nations to see how we are progressing. We talk about enrollment, persistence, and completion. Enrollment refers to, you don't have to write this down, but the percentage of children of grade 1 age who actually enroll on the first day of grade 1, okay, in any given society. Completion is the percentage of those children who finish grade 8. In these countries, we do quite well with respect to enrollment. We do very poorly with respect to completion. In most of these countries, 50% of all the kids drop out before grade 4 during the first 3 years. We lose half the kids. So what does that tell you about what's happening in the classrooms? That the curriculum is antiquated, right? That the kids aren't learning anything. We also know that often smart kids are the first ones to leave, literally. They vote with their feet. They figured out after a few months, even a few weeks, that this is a waste of time, right? So curriculum reform is a major, major challenge. In many of these countries, the curriculum is from an antiquated era. It's brought in by colonial masters that hasn't changed in 80 years. The second issue is violence in the classroom. People talk about making schools happy places. We have to start by making schools safe places for kids. Physical assault and sexual assault of students by teachers are realities, including in these countries, okay? Some simple barriers which we don't think about, which are important: separate bathrooms for girls and young women. Mothers will send their pre-adolescent girls to schools when there's no separate bathroom facilities for them, but at the onset of adolescence, most mothers won't. They want to see the school has made some accommodation for their adolescent daughter. So if you really want girls and young women, particularly of adolescent age, to go to school, toilets for girls and young women. It's really important. I often talk about what I call boring but important issues. A boring but important issue is birth registration. One of the challenges we face in most of these countries, we don't have a functioning national census system. So we don't know the population of the country. We don't know how many kids there are under the age of 14 or 18. So we don't have the baseline to see how we're making progress. And it's really important to have a baseline. So if we invest hundreds of millions of dollars from donors, we know what impact our programs are making. Plan International and other organizations are investing heavily in birth registration. We call it Universal Birth Registration, UBR. What it means is that mothers register the births of their kids before they reach the first year of age. And that's really important. In many of these same countries, and those of you from South Asia, you'll know this, you'll know about paper requirements to enter school, for a mother to enroll her child in school. Those include, in some of these countries, you, the mother, or sometimes the father, turning up at the school with a piece of paper to prove the parentage of the child. Unfortunately, what this often means is to prove who the child's father is. Again, there's incredible sexism in terms of the power of the parent and the authority of the parent with respect to enrolling the child in school. And if a mother cannot, on paper, prove who the child's father is, often that child's not enrolled in school, in a government school. So from the very first day, the child is excluded. So a paper trail, a birth registration, which proves it has nothing to do with the father, that the child has been registered, the child's birth has been recorded, is a first step. In many of these same countries, another barrier: women are not allowed to register the birth of their own child. The father has to be there. So these are real fundamental barriers that make it difficult for all children and for girls in particular. These are paper requirements. These are institutional requirements that are easy to deal with. So Plan International, you have to applaud them for addressing an issue which is not particularly exciting, but really, really important: registering the birth of all children. These are Afghan kids, and they're brave. Because of the investment by the international community, we now have record rates of enrollment since the Taliban era of girls and young women in schools. Curriculum hasn't changed that much, but we've made some progress. But you see now every day in cities across Afghanistan, girls and young women going to school. These are all pictures I've taken. This is in the city of Mazar-e-Sharif. Classes are segregated. Girls learn usually different from at least grade 4 or 5. They're separated from boys. The teachers are from the local community, and we're very happy that many of the teachers are women, and that increasing numbers of the school principals are women as well. I work a lot with kids on the margins of society, and when we say universal primary education by 2015, and that's the Millennium Development Goal, right? Universal primary education by 2015. That means all kids, right? That includes refugee kids. This is a picture I took in a camp in eastern Nepal of the registration of a Bhutanese refugee girl by a United Nations official. It's really important that we include internally displaced people and we include refugee people, particularly girls and young women, in primary education opportunities. We have to include working kids and street children. And we have to make sure the education goes to them. If the kids are mobile, we take the education to them. This is a program I'm particularly excited about and happy about. A lot of my work has been with child domestic workers. And if you don't know what a child domestic worker is, that's a good sign. Child domestic workers, unfortunately, many of you probably would be familiar with. You might have seen them in friends' homes, particularly from Sri Lanka or Bangladesh or Nepal or India. These are children who are non-blood relatives who live in foreigners or in a non-relative's home and who work. They do the dishes, they do the laundry, they look after younger children, they do manual labor. The crucial thing is they're separated from their blood relatives for extended periods of time. Very few of the girls, and we know this from all the studies cross-culturally, very few of the girls are allowed the chance to go to school. Higher numbers of boys are. I know some of you will know situations where there's been a benevolent relationship where the child domestic, because there's been an adult who has shown some interest in him or her, the child has been allowed to go to school after non-working hours and actually has perhaps even finished high school. But all the statistics show this is a very unusual situation. What's much more common, particularly for girls, is they work. They work very long hours and they don't go to school. And they see their parents or their moms maybe once a year. It's also a recipe for physical and sexual abuse of children, okay? These kids are literally working behind walls. They have no contact with a protector or a guardian. These are big issues. And again, these are societies where this kind of issue is not even discussed. So if the child had an issue, who would she or he talk to? What we did is teamed up with Jane Goodall's organization, Roots and Shoots, and the British Council in Kathmandu in Nepal. The British Council in most schools most cities and countries, unfortunately works primarily, in my opinion, with upper middle class people and not with the poor. If you go into British Council offices, they're very nice. They have nice libraries, nice facilities, they have film festivals, but there's nothing ever available for poor people, particularly for poor kids. An incident actually sparked this program. There was a child I knew from the streets who was very bright named Shankar. He was 12 years of age, and he already knew a smidgen of English, and he wanted to learn more. I saw advertised in the newspaper that there was placement tests, not entrance tests, but placement tests at the British Council in Kathmandu. You pay the money, the kid writes the test, the kid is placed in a class, a course, right? No problem. So I took Shankar, we went with one of the social workers, she paid the money. He did the test, he did quite well. And afterwards, the English woman from British Council sat down with the social worker from Nepal, myself, and said, Ms. Sarita, Mr. Peter, there's a little problem. There's no place for Shankar. And of course, what the issue was not just poverty, but who knows South Asia? What would the issue be? What would the barrier be that keeps Shankar out of the British Council for classes? Caste. Someone said it, caste. Caste is still there in South Asia. Caste is a system by which people, according to their birth, are set into a certain level in society. And the caste system, unfortunately, in Nepal is still very strong, and in India it's there as well. Caste determines where you go to school, where you can practice your faith, where you can get drinking water, who your friends are, and where eventually you'll be even cremated. When my daughter came with us to Kathmandu, the little girl next door leaned over the wall, and her first question to my daughter, who was 8 at the time, was not, what is your name? First question to my daughter was, what is your caste? Because that determines everything. It would determine if the girl next door could play with Annalie. So Shankar is Dalit, untouchable. And people can sometimes tell just by looking, darker skin or features. And the British Council woman was saying that we don't teach Dalit kids at the British Council. Oh, those are fighting words for me. I mean, I am a lawyer, right? Oh, a correction on my first talk. And this is a really important correction. You know, I made comments about law, right? About the racing around the Mercedes with the top down in Vancouver. Here's a correction, a really important one. I think law is a great background, great foundation, great training. I just think it's an awful profession, okay? In my opinion. But law, I think, is extraordinarily powerful training for journalism, human rights, United Nations, activism, defending the rights of girls. So it's filmmaking, all kinds of things. So if you have an interest in those areas of professional work, I think law is great training, right? I just think taking the next step and actually signing up in a law firm for 30 years, like this, no, it's not for me, and it shouldn't be for everybody in this room either, okay? So those were fighting words. What we did was I essentially began a legal action against the British Council in Nepal. Because there's laws in the books about this. You can't discriminate on the basis of caste, right? It's against the law, that's human rights legislation. So I hired a very good lawyer and paid her lots of money, and we began essentially a criminal and civil prosecution against the British Council. And I got, of course, a quick call from the director of the British Council saying, maybe we can amicably settle this issue. which we did. But I wasn't going to settle just for Shankar being admitted to this class, right? I wanted like a whole bunch of kids from the street to get into the British Council. I wanted my pound of flesh, and I got it. So we forced the British Council to open their doors to dirty, foul-mouthed, snot-nosed working children. Can you believe it? Okay, can you believe it? We did it. We did it, honestly. And the program continues to this day. Who are the teachers? The teachers are 15 to 18-year-old Nepali students, high school students, like yourselves, exactly the same age range. And a lot of them are from high-caste families. But they know that the system doesn't make any sense. They come 3 times a week and they tutor up these girls, exclusively for girls. We designed a curriculum. We thought it would last. We thought, well, actually, the British Council helped us with the curriculum. We thought it would last these kids 2 years. The girls exhausted the curriculum in 4 months. They were like sponges that hadn't seen water in a long, long time, right? So a voracious desire to learn. Why only 3 hours a day, 3 days a week? Because these kids have owners. That's what they're called. The people who they work for are their owners. And the girls will say, my owner will only let me out 3 hours a day, 3 days a week. And even then, it was a stretch. These girls had to negotiate with their owners for that permission. Now, this kid has a especially interesting story. I would literally dream of the day with this girl. This is taken 4 years ago. Now she's 16. Okay. I would dream of the day when this kid comes to this conference, honestly, as a 16-year-old. And it's possible, right? But her story was quite interesting because on her first week on the job, she learned that part of her job was to play chess with the owner's son. And she picked up the game pretty quickly, and by the 3rd or 4th game, guess what was happening as she was winning? So owner's son, who was not the brightest light on the tree, if I can say that. Okay, I shouldn't say that in front of students and educators. He wasn't the brightest light on the tree. He ran out to dad that the kid had, from the streets, and she's not from the streets, by the way, but she's really poor, had beat him in chess. So that, you know what the dad did? Took a stick and beat the heck out of her, literally. Because she had humiliated his Brahmin, high caste son. So she developed really quickly what we would call a coping strategy. She had to play chess with a kid every day. So what did she decide to do? She lost every game. But she said to me, Peter, sir, it was really hard to lose against this kid. I'd leave my queen totally exposed, and the kid wouldn't take the queen, take the queen, So who should be going to school, this girl or the boy? And the answer, of course, is both. Universal primary education by 2015. It's a right. It's a Millennium Development Goal. A missed opportunity is that your schools should have done so much more. Not you. This is not a blame thing or an allocation of responsibility. It should have come from the school leaders, honestly. It should have come from the heads of your schools and your board members. Someone should have figured out, we built these beautiful schools. We've got facilities. We've got computers and lights, and generators and swimming pools and showers and soap and all these things. And most schools shut down, 3 o'clock, 3:30? And then they're empty till the next day at 8. Someone could have thought about opening up those schools to these kids, offering 2 hours of classes at the end of the day or on weekends. I think the international community should have done so much more to make sure that we reach that goal of universal primary education by 2015. You know what? We're going to fail. You saw the numbers. There's no way we're going to pass that test. So we will have failed the world's children, and mostly poor kids, and children of color, and mostly girls. And that's an immense tragedy. And it was completely preventable. So what do? We get angry and we get smart. Robert Kennedy once said, and Robert Kennedy was the Attorney General of the United States, who was destined to become president, an extraordinary man, and he was taken down by an assassin's bullet in the Ambassador Hotel in May of 1968. And he was one of my heroes. Robert Kennedy once said that history is shaped by individual acts of courage and belief. And that's the basis for small L liberalism, the idea that people individually and collectively can shape their community and change the world. And that's what I want you to do. Literally to change the world. And you can do it, right? So these are the kids in the class at British Council in Kathmandu. mentored by 15, 16, 17-year-olds. And here's my next pitch, and this will dovetail a little bit with yesterday's other path section. I think you need to make your world bigger. All of you. And one of the ways you can make your world bigger is by taking a step out of the little cocoon of safety you're in now. And that means getting yourself into another country and another environment with these kids. I need you, okay? And you're all capable of doing it. And I know you got dads and moms who may be a little bit conservative. We can deal with them too, okay? If your mom says you can't go alone, invite your mom. It's possible. I spoke a few months ago at Seville at a conference for educators. There was a woman there who works with Qatar Foundation. She came to see me afterwards. She bought me coffee. She said, this is perfect for my 15-year-old. She'd be a great volunteer. And I thought, okay, maybe it'll happen. 3 weeks later, the 15-year-old was in Kathmandu and then on a bus to a town called Bandipur from Qatar Academy. What was her passion? Girls rugby. She set up a girls rugby team. She went back for Eid vacation 2 weeks ago with more equipment for the girls. She did it. She tried to convince her friends and no one came with her. She said, that's fine, Peter, I'll come on my own. I teamed her up with Ann Kami, a 21-year-old who looks after all the younger volunteers, including my 17-year-old daughter. She had, again, an extraordinary experience. It's there for each of you. And please don't come up to me afterwards and say, Mr. Peter, I like what you're saying, but what I'm going to do is make my first $1 million and then I'll come work for you. I get that all the time. How many of those people do you think I ever hear from again? Zero, okay? Even if they make their $1 million, it's never enough. 2 Latin words you should think about even at age 17 or 18. Tempus fugit. Tick, tock, tick, tock, tick, tock. Time is running. You're already very busy people. You'll become even busier when you go to college. Some of you will get married, have houses, kids, mortgages. Life gets complicated. The Buddhists say, and this is a bit of a contradiction, the Buddhists say the only person who's totally free is the person with no possessions. You know, wealth, and you're all relatively wealthy by international standards. Wealth can be 2 things, and some of you are very wealthy. Wealth can either be wings that sets you free, or it can be an anchor around your neck. I think a lot of you, some of you already have been dragged down. And as I said in my plenary speech, the irony for me, these kids are there. It's a 4-hour flight from Doha to Kathmandu. We have people on the other side who will protect you and guide you and help you. You will have an extraordinary experience at virtually no risk, except the risks to making your world bigger and seeing other opportunities. But of the people in this room, how many think will do it? Maybe 1. Maybe 2, not more. And that for me is disappointing. And I think for you, you're missing an extraordinary world, right? So that's the challenge. For you to volunteer, and I've got information here. Why I mentioned Nepal in particular because it's easy to visit, it's safe for women. My daughter's been volunteering from the age of 12 and a half, 13. And you can make a significant impact. You can work in English, right? And we're set up for it. We have the programming for it. There's no reason, no possible excuse why you really couldn't go. It's not even expensive, okay? A story, a vignette. Several years ago, the daughter of the chair of the Bank of Nova Scotia in Canada, one of our largest banks. Any Canadians here? Oh, Canada, right? Okay, good for you, okay. Bank of Nova Scotia, big bank. Peter Godsoe is the chair of the board, a good friend. His daughter Eden was 16. She had turned 16 in May, and now it was July, and they wanted me to arrange volunteering for Eden. So I sent her off to a project called Kukula, K-U-K-U-L-A, in Costa Rica. Costa Rica is beautiful, okay? Rainforest, they call it the Switzerland of Central America, jungle. And she worked in the only city that's ugly in Costa Rica called Limon, where all the street kids are, on the Atlantic coast. She had 6 incredible months. You know Costa Rica probably. Great, 6 incredible weeks during the school break. And with little kids, girls and boys in the streets. And I happened to be in Toronto when Eden came back for her first night back home with her parents in Rosedale, very nice kind of leafy area in Toronto. And mom and dad said, Peter, please join us for dinner tonight at home. So we had a beautiful dinner, but let's rewind the tape. Something that happened in May, 2 months before she went. In Canada, when kids turn 16, girls have sometimes the Sweet 16 thing, which you might be familiar with. It's a cultural thing, right? And on her Sweet 16, Eden's parents gave her a red convertible BMW. Okay, very nice car. Okay, so just file that away. Okay, so I'm at the dinner. It's a very nice meal, very Toronto. You know, and I do not shut down dinner parties and make people guilty. Don't worry. You know, it's not my job. Okay, so we had a very nice, and she was a great volunteer, right? She did a really good job. At the end of the meal, Eden asked a question, which was a very interesting question. She turned to her parents and said, she said, Mom, Dad, is the BMW mine or is it yours? And maybe some of you know where this is going. Her dad and mom looked at each other and said, Eden, you know, it's in our name legally just for insurance reasons, but of course it's yours. We gave it to you for your Sweet 16. We know you love your BMW. The next week, Eden sold the BMW and sent a check for $62,000 to the Project for Girls in Costa Rica. The only person who's truly free is a person with no possessions, right? See, some of you have to get rid of the stuff that you've already accumulated in your life to make this possible. So that's a pitch for a couple of things. Not waiting forever to do this, understanding that you're all old enough to do it now, right? And you have options. You could do this. And it's a great exercise in terms of advocacy and you persuading your parents that you can do this, okay? I'm around chilling till 3 o'clock when the buses leave. I'll be floating around the Spider and the coffee place, okay? Buy me a coffee and we'll talk, okay? This is apprenticeship training for young women, and often we link literacy with income for young people, and that's really important, okay? One of the things we've done in Afghanistan, which is interesting, we've worked with a couple different mobile companies, including Roshan, which is based in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, to set up, in conjunction with literacy programs for women, banking programs. A lot of these women, they make the goods, but since it's Afghanistan, they cannot sell the goods themselves. They have to sell them through brothers or uncles or their husbands. But they have sources of revenue. In the past, what happened is all the money was taken by, guess whom? Their husband, right? Now what we've been able to do is through mobile phone banking, I don't have a phone here, but you know what mobile phones look like. Through mobile phone banking, many of these women now, thousands of women in our programming now, have their own bank account, okay? And they access the bank account through their mobile phone. There's an intermediary who actually deposits the money, but it's all done electronically, and they get a text readout that, you know, 1,000 dirhams or rupees have been deposited for you in this account. The incredible thing is for most of these women, although they have the choice, most of these women choose not to tell one person about the bank account. And who is that person? Their husbands, of course. Their husbands don't know, right? I will tell you that when you're stuck in traffic in Kabul, you have to worry about a couple of things. One is obviously suicide bombers. The other thing we see a lot of is women in the streets begging. And these are women who've been thrown out by their husbands, right? And that's a big phenomenon. And men will say that every woman in the street reminds other women that if they misbehave, that's where they're going to end up, right? And that's pretty sobering because we don't have shelters for women in Kabul, of course. We have very few shelters for women, right? And spousal assault is also a big issue, but that's another subject for another day. Having a bank account with their own money means that if a woman is ever in a situation where her life is in danger, she has an option. She has a choice. Maybe she's saved up $50, but that $50 could mean that she can stay with an aunt or a sister or a female friend and put something on the table. So it's freedom, and it's an element of what we call social protection. It's really important. So it's literacy, it's learning, it's income generation, it's a modicum of independence for women, and that's crucial. Heroes. I get to work, you know, I don't make, with the United Nations I make a good income. Often I'm making no income, right? But I get to work with extraordinary people. Role models, heroes, champions. This is a Catholic sister who's won the highest civilian award in all of India called the Padma Shri. She's from Ireland. She's only the second non-Indian to win the Padma Shri award. Her name is Sister Cyril, and she has pioneered a revolution for education in West Bengal, which is one of the largest states in India, where Calcutta is. And her story is interesting. Some of you may know the Loreto schools. Loreto schools in any society tend to cater to upper middle class girls, girls only. And in the 1960s, she arrived in Calcutta to teach at a Loreto school and was teaching upper middle class girls. And then one day she bumped into a working kid sitting on the pavement and who was shining shoes or whatever she was doing. And this woman had the idea of setting up a special program for girls, for working girls in Calcutta. It grew and grew and grew, and today this is a fundamental part of Loreto. She has working girls studying side by side with the fee-paying kids. And it's an extraordinary thing to see. But she also has revolutionized teacher training in West Bengal. So she's a hero of mine, and she's tough as nails, no nonsense, straight as an arrow, completely incorruptible. But I get to, whenever I need to have my batteries charged, I visit Sister Cyril. She's just a champion for girls' education in India. In India, there's very exciting things happening for education. This is what teacher training is about. A bit of a pitch to teachers here. We need you too. We need you to help train up our teachers in Nepal and other countries. So this is a picture of teachers from Dubai British School, who came to Nepal. We sent them to a rural school, and they trained up the local teachers. So you see the little kids on the floor wearing the hats. They're the guinea pigs. And those are the foreign teachers at the front from Dubai. And the Nepali teachers are watching, and then they do the same lesson with a different group of kids. So it's very hands-on learning, and it's very powerful. What we're trying to do is introduce some idea of interactive learning, right? That it's not just rote learning. Those of you who have lived in South Asia, you'll know what I mean when I say 90% of learning is rote memorization, right? And that's all it is. And we've got to move away from rote learning. And there's different ways we can teach kids in a classroom. I mentioned Paulo Freire in my session yesterday. One of the revolutionaries of education of the 20th century was a Brazilian named Paulo Freire. And he really wrote the books about teaching and learning, pedagogy. One of the things he said is we have to take this thing we call education and liberate it from buildings we call schools. And this machine you see here is letting this happen. This is the $100 laptop, which is now in distribution around the world. Some of you may say, oh, Mr. Peter, I'm not like you, I'm not a humanitarian, I'm not passionate about this. My thing is, I'm a geek, my thing is IT, I want to work with my computer. Guess what? That passion for IT, for computers, is really important. And this machine is making a huge impact in countries around the world. The great thing about the computer keyboard is it doesn't care about your gender or your skin color or how much money is in your pocket. It only cares about one thing. We've done extensive studies of the use of the $100 laptop in Nepal. We have some sobering results from that study. We ask kids the best thing about the computer, and we get some surprising answers. A frequent answer in Nepal, particularly from girls, the best thing about the laptop is the following. When they get an answer wrong, the computer doesn't hit them. So, and we never expected that answer, right? The computer doesn't hit them. So it's non-judgmental. The computer doesn't tell them they're an idiot or they're stupid, right? Or that since they're a girl, they should go back to their homes and do laundry, right? So it's a tool of liberation for kids, particularly for girls. Volunteering. This is a project in Bangkok, which I helped start. I was in Bangkok 4 days ago visiting this project. When I take breaks from Afghanistan, we have to leave every 42 days. I'm supposed to be on a beach somewhere, and of course, where do I end up? Conferences like yours and visiting schools. This is a special school named after the radical Polish pediatrician, Janusz Korczak, one of my heroes. He was a pioneer of children's rights. He was years ahead of his time. He set up a code of children's rights in Poland. He had a radio program in Poland. This is the 1930s. And unfortunately, the Nazis arrived and all the Jews were put in the ghetto in Warsaw. And he, on a very famous day, Nazi stormtroopers arrived at the orphanage he was running with dogs. They frightened all the kids. Korczak told the men to go away and to come back without the dogs, and that his children would be ready in half an hour. And indeed, the Nazis came back, and half an hour later, Korczak had all the kids lined up in their uniforms, and they marched to the train station. All the way to the train station, People tried to pull Korczak out of the line because he was famous. They had offered him Swiss passports. He went with his kids onto the trains, and 3 days later, they all were exterminated in Treblinka. 246 children, and the teachers, and Korczak. So this is a project in Bangkok. We had an American donor, John Cook, step up with $3.5 million, and this happens. People often put money in my pocket, not necessarily $3.5 million, but they're wolves in sheep's clothing, right? And we built the school in the shantytown, and it's beautiful. And it's for poor kids, but super bright kids. Some of these kids now are studying all over the world, right? At top IB schools, even United World Colleges. And who do I have as teachers? Da-da-da! People like you, gap summer and gap year students. People between first and second year IB or between grade 11 and 12. And you have the option, you have the opportunity to become a friend of these children, a role model, and their hero. Literally their hero, okay? It's an incredibly powerful experience for the child and for you. This is a young woman, age 17, from a very, it just happens to be this picture I put in. She's from a very unusual family. Her father is one of the great musicians, modern musicians of the 20th century. He's from the UK, and his band's called The Police. Any of you listen to The Police? This is Mickey Sumner, her dad Sting. And I've known her dad for years, and she's a fine young woman. And she did a great job with the kids. She spent 6 months in the project in Bangkok. She's now studying art in Paris. She could have done anything. She could have laid on the beach. She could have checked herself into the Four Seasons here for 2 years, right? No. The only person who's truly free is the person with no possessions. So a t-shirt, pair of shorts, flip-flops, this, and some sponges around the table. Those are her sponges, right? I've got kids right now who need good schools. 2 children from Nepal. That's Lakpa on the left. We call her Lucky, and Sangeeta on the right. They need schools. They need teachers. They need places where they'll be safe to start with. That's important. But where they'll be inspired, right? And they'll work hard, and they'll never disappoint you. These are projects where children, young people, students from different schools have come and visited in Nepal and in Thailand, mostly in Nepal. Whatever your passion is, we can work with that. Music is something special for kids, and these schools don't have music training or resources. So we bring some instruments, and if kids can play or teach, it's fantastic. We talked about IT, football, all these things. We ran a music camp in Nepal this summer. Correction, students from Dulwich School in Shanghai. They tried to organize something with their teachers, couldn't get the teacher. I said, sure. So 16-year-old students, 8 of them, came on their own from Shanghai to Nepal and ran a music camp in Nepal for local kids. Don't wait for the teachers. Just do it, right? This is a nice story. Medina, also known as Sofiana. I teach a class every Friday in Kabul for kids from a whole wide range of society. Many of them are poor. Some of them are not so poor. They turn up at our compound. We have really intense security. Unfortunately, the youngest suicide bomber this year in Kabul was an 11-year-old girl who killed 12 security officers, including 4 ISAF NATO people. So we have really intense security when the kids come in on Fridays. But the highlight of my week is teaching this class. We already have 8 people from the class studying overseas at top schools. I find schools which are willing to take them. Sofiana is interesting because not only is she a really bright student, she's Afghanistan's #1 female tennis player. She's the one I talked about earlier. And she's doing really, really well. When she arrived in Switzerland, we enrolled her in the Roger Federer Summer Tennis Academy to start with. She beat all the girls in the team in Switzerland, and then she took on the boys at her school. She beat them too. One guy threw down his racket in disgust and said he'll never play tennis again. And I visit the school regularly. And Sofiana said to me, but Peter, don't worry. He wasn't really a tennis player. He was a weekend country club tennis player, right? And here they are. That's Fatah I talked about yesterday, 2 days ago on the right. And that's Sofiana on the left, okay? And everything's possible, right? Everything's possible. 17-year-old South Asian, young woman, Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, it's extraordinary, right? One teacher, I thought I'd finish with a quotation by Malala, right? To honor you, right? to honor you and your generation. And if you're Indian or Pakistani, right, then you should, you know, be drinking lots and lots of ginger ale or something to celebrate. I mean, honestly, it's extraordinary. Co-awardees, Pakistan, India, educators. I don't know Malala. I know Kailash Satyarthi very well. Kailash is a star. I've known him for 20 years. He's been to my house in Canada, and he led an authentic movement of working children in India. Okay? One child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world. Again, my world is how I keep myself sane. I talked about this yesterday as I trek. I trek in the mountains. And I have a chance to do a lot of trekking in Nepal. My daughter loves trekking, and this is where we escape to on a regular basis. It gives me some balance in my life. Anyone have any idea how much time we have left? Where's my, how much time do we have, guys? Okay, we're going to put a video. Thank you very much. We're going to put a little video on. Again, I've got some resources here, but we're going to finish in 3 minutes. We're not going to have any discussion here because we've got a group coming in for political extremism, and you may want to attend it, and you have to line up again. So we'll show the video. I'll run down to the Big Spider coffee place, and I'll be chilling there for the day, okay? Most of the day. I've got some information on volunteering. Don't wait forever, okay? If you want to do this stuff, do it now because this is a strategic time in your life. It will have an impact on what your extended essay is on. I've had students who build their extended essay about around a volunteer experience in Nepal or in Thailand or in Bhutan. It will impact what you study at college. Maybe you'll write a book or make a film, right? And it'll definitely have an impact on your profession. So don't put it off till you're 30, 35 years of age, okay? I'm really lucky because I get to work with great people. I'm a social entrepreneur by nature. I start things. I also mentor a lot of other social entrepreneurs. And one of the guys I've mentored started Skateistan, SKATEISTAN.org. www.skateistan.org is the website. It's a program using skateboarding to attract girls and boys from the margins of society in Afghanistan, in South Africa, and now in Cambodia. Cambodia, by the way, is a great place to volunteer, okay? And we can make it happen for you. So the little clip about girls and sport and fun and music and love and passion, okay? All those things. And I hope you enjoyed the session. I really appreciate you came today. You had lots of choices. And again, I'll be floating around Big Spider, okay? Thanks to you. Okay? Lights, please.
Happiness hit her like a train on a track. She hid around corners and she hid under bed. She killed it with kisses and for all she fled. With every bubble she sang with a drink and washed it away down the kitchen sink. The dog days are over, the dog days are gone. The horses are coming, so you better run. Run back for your mother, run for your father, for your children, for your sisters and brothers. Leave them alone, behind. You can't carry you want to survive. The dark days are over. The dark days are done. Hey, run fast for your mother, run fast for your father, for your children, for your sisters and brothers. You are lonely behind. You can't breathe. You want to survive. The dark days are over. The dark days are done.
How was that, guys? Was it good? How did that go? Big spider or coffee? Okay, big spider, guys. How was that, teachers?
So sure, reach out. Baby, let's go. I can do anything with you. I can tell anything to you. I can be
I know Craig very well.
anyone with you.
And his mom, which is another story.
Watching you and the moon. We're going home soon. Can I
Peter, please, come on, Peter. How was that?
Yes, that was awesome. By the way, before the presentation, I was talking about
Yeah,
said
good.
that you won't be able to do it, but you do it because you're not mentally prepared.
Listen to it.
This turns out to be everything.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
So come. You gotta come, right?
Yes, I am.
Good, come.
Are you hungry right now?
Yes, I'm hungry right now.
Yes, all right.
Okay, we're gonna go to Big Spider, okay? Can you help me unplug this, guys? I have no idea. How do I do this?
Can I? Can I also come along?
I'm going to Big Spider.
Okay.
Just come to Big Spider, guys, or coffee place.
Okay.
Can you guys help me? Can you check me through? How do I unplug this? Let's talk about Big Spider. Yeah. Big Spider.
used to go to the one.
I've been speaking to the one in Singapore. Go bring it down. It's okay.
we can do. I'm coming home with you.
When did you move here?
Feel like
like
a star
3 years ago?
shining wherever you are.
Wait, the people are coming in, guys.
Yeah, people are coming in now.
We're fine. Everyone's gone, right?
Yeah.
Thanks for your help, man. Can you help Kevin? Yeah. Help me with stuff, okay? Are you gonna go to the second session now? Or you came out?
No. Actually, I was going to, but then
Yeah, you go to the second session.
it's fine.
Okay.
I was gonna. Well, no. Just talk to him. Just go to him.
Are you sure? Listen, I'm around all day.
Well, that's fine. I can talk to you. I can talk to John after.
Okay.
I can tell anything to you. I can be
That went well.
Yes, yes. It was.
All the sessions are a little bit different, right?
I think this one's particularly practical in the sense
Yeah.
that it's
Gave an idea what people can do, right? Thanks a lot.
And so she
Maybe.
goes, and so you know, there she goes, and so you know, I am your favorite girl. I can go anywhere with you. I can do anything with you. I can tell anything to you. I can be anyone with you. do anything with you. I can tell anything to you. I can be anyone. Viajei pensando nela, a saudade me apertou. Eu sei, quero voltar. O sol beijando aquela areia, que saudade arruador. Sonhei, quero voar. As noites morenas nos bares de Ipanema, o sol adormece nos dois irmãos. I love you, Ipanema, e sonhos que eu vivi. A melodia veio lembrando o tom. Viajei pensando nela, a saudade me apertou. Eu sei, quero voltar. Vejo o sol beijando aquela areia, que saudade arruador. Sonhei, quero voar. As noites morenas nos bares de Ipanema, o sol adormece nos dois irmãos. I love you, Ipanema, e sonhos que eu vivi. A melodia veio lembrando todos. I love you, Ipanema, e sonhos que eu vivi. Eu voltaria sempre pensando em ti. I love you, Ipanema, e sonhos que eu vivi. A melodia veio lembrando todos os dias. I love you, Ipanema, sonhos que eu vivi. A melodia veio
Yun. Ito lang sa control ko. Opo muna yung button. Who's the next? Who's speaking now? Oh, so discussion panel?
Debates.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, Jun. No laptop, just only Jun.
Sorry.
Yeah, Jun, the background music on.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second session. If I can have your attention for just a minute. If you were here in the session before, you know what I'm going to say. Basically, just in the name of being fair to everybody else who's here, at the end of this session, I'd like everybody to exit the auditorium and then line up again if you want to attend the next session. And so you can exit through either this door or that door. Yeah, either this door or that door, and then you just line up again just like you did for this one, so you can get another ticket and enter for the second session. Thank you.
Okay, welcome to our panel on religious extremism. My name is Clyde Wilcox. I'm a professor of government at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., but I'm here this year and next year at least, teaching at the Georgetown Cutter campus. We have two panelists here who are going to take part. I study religious extremism a little bit in America, but I'm the facilitator today, so I'm just going to be posing questions, and I'll let my two distinguished panelists talk back and forth, and then at some point we'll throw it open to questions from the audience. So I'll let each of my panelists introduce themselves.
Good morning. My name is Thomas Michel. I'm also a professor at Georgetown University, and I'm teaching in the theology department. My background is mostly I've been living in Asia, Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, so Southeast Asia. And before coming to Georgetown, I spent about 4 or 5 years teaching in Turkey as well. And then I was teaching on the Washington campus at Georgetown. And I've been here in Qatar now this is my second year. So my third semester here in Qatar. It's on.
Hello? Okay,
Yeah.
now it's on. Hi, everyone. My name is Sohaira Siddiqui. I'm also a faculty in theology along with Father Tom. And my specialty is classical Islamic law and political theory, focusing on the 18th to 13th centuries. So I think my interest in Islamic extremism comes more from a theological and legal and political perspective, looking at how classical texts are interpreted, misinterpreted, and used to fuel different ideas today about Islamic extremism.
Great. So I thought we might begin the session with the question, what is religious extremism? And how do we distinguish it from being deeply religious? So, Father Tom, what do you think religious extremism is?
I guess I should maybe clarify. There might be people keep calling me Father. I'm a Catholic priest. I'm a Jesuit, one of the Jesuits at Georgetown, and so that's why you hear that. Well, you know, my involvement with religious extremism is kind of personal, and comes mainly from my years in Indonesia, where we really had some real violence going on for a number of years. And in the Philippines, I can remember being there, and the kidnappers came to the classroom, and they were standing in the back with submachine guns, and they said, "We want this foreigner to come with me." And fortunately for me, there was a Muslim woman who was taking the class, middle-aged woman. She spoke to them really sharply in Maranao, and they kind of backed off sheepishly, and they left. So I said to her after we went on with the class, and when it was over, I said to her, "What did you say to them?" She said, "I told them this was education and they had no place here and they should get out." And they did. So various incidents like that, I kind of more speaking from a personal experience of also extremists that I've known and talked to. And I would say that there's really a lot of factors. And if we narrow it down to one or another thing, I think we're not really understanding what's going on. Later on, if we get a chance to talk about where it comes from, how it comes about, I'd like to give you my theory, but I just say at the beginning, don't look for just one factor, and don't look only at theology. If we're talking about religious extremism and we just focus on the teachings of Islam or Christianity or Hinduism, I think we're sometimes going to be missing the real factors that are going on. What do you think, Sohaira?
Yeah, I agree with you in the sense that there's always going to be a lot of factors that produce extremism. And I think even when we're talking about religious extremism, we have to understand that there's different types of extremism. So there's political extremism, there's social extremism, and usually the way we end up defining it as almost kind of making it the other. So we have an ordinary set of beliefs, or we have an accepted set of beliefs, and then the extremists are someone that holds something different. Now, the important thing to remember in that is that we are obviously coming from a subjective perspective. So if you speak to an extremist, they're not going to say, my beliefs are extremist or my beliefs are immoral. They're going to think that they hold correct beliefs. And so I think it's always good to remember that as we're talking about religious extremism, we're also remembering that we're coming from a specific perspective of what is extreme and what is potentially ordinary. In terms of characteristics, the reason that I'm very interested in it from a theological perspective, and again, Father Tom is correct that you have to look at it from all of these other perspectives as well, is that usually you end up seeing certain traits when you find something and try to classify it as extremist. So there tends to be a lot of intolerance in there, and that can be political extremism, social extremism, religious extremism, but it's often characterized by intense intolerance, especially towards other ideas. So it's very rare that you're talking to someone that has extremist ideas about something and they're going to be very open to dialogue. One of the reasons we're having this specific panel is because violence is often associated with extremism as well. That doesn't mean that extremist ideas will always result in violence, but it is the case that they will sometimes result in violence. Another thing that I think is really important is there is a demonization of the other. So just as an individual who potentially holds extremist ideas is very intolerant towards the other, they also demonize the other. They also think that what I hold is a correct belief, and kind of the intensity of that intolerance and the intensity of the demonization of the other is kind of why we end up calling those beliefs extremist. So I would kind of start there.
You have any further thoughts on that response?
Yeah, I think when we talk about extremism, very often what we're saying is when people are religiously conscious and move into violence. I think it's the connection between religion and violence, which is kind of what we use as a code word, religious extremism. But see, I'm really convinced, where does it come from? And if I look back on my experience, I was living in Indonesia in the 1990s. And well, I'd been living there for many years before that. And we had all gotten along pretty well. We have Muslims, we have Christians, we have Hindus, we have Buddhists. But two things really happened in the late 1990s in Indonesia. One was the fall of the dictatorship that we'd had, which almost everybody felt was both oppressive and corrupt. And the second thing was an economic disaster. Remember when those various Asian countries had the economy fell all at once? Well, what happened when these things occurred? You had a lot of really angry people. They felt that they had been lied to for 20 years, that they had been stolen from for 20 years. They lost faith in the various institutions of society, mostly the press. The press had only been saying what it was told to say for 20 years, and that everything was rosy and fine. So they didn't really believe that. They were frustrated. There was a lot of unemployment because of the economic collapse, which means you have frustrated, angry people with time on their hands. And so we started getting violence. And the violence was not directed towards the family of the dictator. They were safely away and their money was safely away in some other countries. But they were turning on their neighbors, mainly for reasons of something that distinguished them. So we had Christians suddenly killing Muslims, Muslims suddenly killing Christians. And at times it looked like the whole country was going to turn into a conflagration. People would be showing up, troublemakers, and they'd be taking advantage of who in a situation when you can't trust any of the public institutions, who can you trust? Well, you feel you can trust the people who go to church with you on Sunday, the people that you pray together with at noontime on Friday in the mosque. And so these were really centers for fomenting a kind of feeling that the others are out to get us, the others are out to mistreat us. And we had documented cases of people showing up at a church or at a mosque after worship on a motorbike, and they're saying, the next village, the Christians just killed 11 Muslims. Or in the next village, Muslims just killed Christians. People would really get all excited and they say they're coming after us. And what they would do is they would go after the others. It seemed like in a year or two, ordinary relations turned into extremism. And unless you looked at the economic question, unless you looked at the political situation, at the question of media, at the question of identity, who were the people you could trust, who were your people, you really wouldn't be able to put your fingers on how did extremism come about? I remember one horrible moment in the year 2000 when a group of Christians in eastern Malaysia, Indonesia, killed Muslims, killed about 35 of them. And we were all thinking, oh, this is just going to spread through the country. It's going to be the beginning of Armageddon. And so what happened was the Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, and Hindu leaders got together on television and said, extremism is not a part of our religion. War and violence and hatred is not what's being taught by our religion. Stay at home. Don't get involved into this. Don't get pulled into this. And to everybody's surprise, people pretty much stayed at home. We had a few isolated incidents that occurred for another year and a half. But this huge conflagration did not occur. And I think it was basically, this is where the tenets of the religions came to the fore. The teachers were saying, Islam is a religion of peace. It doesn't teach killing your neighbor. Christians were saying, Jesus taught us not to be killing one another, to love your neighbor. And the others were saying the same thing. And so I think that that extremism can come from a number of factors, but it's not inevitable. It can be opposed.
Tara? He basically is saying that violence is the key indicator of extremism, and then proposes a theory of how extremism develops. So what are your response to that?
I think in terms of the factors relating to extremism, I wouldn't disagree at all with Father Tom. I think any case you take of extremism, especially when it's associated with violence, whether we're looking at the situation in Indonesia, whether we're looking at modern day Iraq, whether we're looking at Lebanon, whether we're looking at Nigeria, anytime we take the cases in which people typically look at to try to understand extremism, we're always going to see underlying political issues, underlying social issues. And I think part of the problem is that when individuals don't feel as if they have political security, economic security, they don't have stability in their lives, they begin to look elsewhere for meaning. There's a sense of loss that a lot of individuals feel. They don't have jobs, their families are being killed, their kids cannot go to school. They're trying to somehow infuse their life with meaning. And that's where religion kind of steps in. And I agree with Father Tom that religion can actually be used to resist religious extremism. But I think part of the problem is that people can also take religions, manipulate them, take religious texts that talk about war, and take those texts and manipulate them to actually put forward an agenda for religious extremism. And I think that's the difficulty when we come to religion, is that it can be both the solution, but it can also be abused and then also become part of the problem in a lot of these areas. But I think just to look at religion and say, okay, we look at religion and this is the cause of extremism, I think that's totally incorrect. Every situation I've ever encountered of religious extremism, you begin to pull back the layers and you'll always see there's people there that are identifying injustice in society, whether it be political or economic, and from there, they're trying to find kind of meaning in their life and trying to find a solution for it.
So why do you think that some people are drawn to religious extremism and others are not in the same situation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a good question. I think part of it is we've got to really look at frustration. We've got to look at anger. I think these are, and now they don't always show up. I think also I've talked to people, to Muslim friends in Europe, and many of them who are well integrated and have had good opportunities in Europe, and opportunities to get good education, get good jobs, they really identify with the countries that they've been living in, and they don't see they don't try to be using religion to say we're better or we're correct, we're stronger, we are a higher moral quality than the people we're living with. But you know, when you get rejected, when you experience discrimination, when you experience wrongdoing, when people look at you in a way that you can tell that they're not welcoming, then I think you look for you identify yourself over against the group that you're with. And I think that if your religion is different, that's one of the things you can hang on to. So many of the conflicts that we read about in the newspapers and we call religious conflicts, one religion's group against another, are, I think, very often what sociologists call identity conflicts. Who is your group? And is your group getting passed by? Is it getting oppressed by the other group? Which group is going to be dominant in getting the few university posts and getting the new public housing that comes up, that gets the civil service jobs? And if it's this other group, and they could be another group because they have a different language, because they have a different race, because they have a different religion, then your group is saying we have to stand up and fight for our group and their rights. And I think because religion is such a thing that touches us so deeply, I think very often it can be one of the reasons or one of the factors that we really identify with and that forms our group. Well,
can I follow up with one thought for you? Because you talked about the integrated Muslims in Europe, and what we read, at least, is that their children or grandchildren are coming across to join ISIS. And so
their children
are leaving to join ISIS, that there are 200 young Muslims from Britain, and, I have no idea if these numbers are correct, but there's a indication is that parents are well integrated, and then children or grandchildren are somehow.
Sure. Well, maybe there's 200, I don't know. And how many of those are children of immigrants that we don't know how many are converts. But in any case, it's an infinitesimal number of how many million Muslims are there in Germany and France and England, that if 200 become religious extremists, that's quite a small number.
Good point. Sorry?
So I think looking at the psychology of an individual is actually quite important. And I think as more people start studying extremism, they actually start understanding that beyond looking at the various factors that both Father Tom and I have mentioned, political and economic and social, the psychology of the individual is actually very important in this whole process as well. And there's a scholar, Eric Huffer, who wrote a book called The True Believer. And one of the things he tries to talk about in the book is this idea of the passionate state of mind. What is the state of mind that actually drives someone to go along with some of these more extremist tendencies? And one of the things that he highlights is this idea of extreme helplessness, which is something I alluded to earlier before. And I think what I would add to this idea of extreme helplessness is also the idea for immediate, kind of an immediate change. So one story that I can tell you is that my sister was doing a medical rotation with a doctor who worked with Doctors Beyond Borders, or Doctor Without Borders, and he was a gynecologist, and he was actually in the war in Lebanon. And either his mother or his sister was killed in the war, and the house was actually blown up while he was outside of the house. And now when he got into the house, the individual, the mother, the sister, with their last kind of remaining strength, took their own blood and wrote on the wall, "Do something," as kind of a last note to this doctor. And he had two options at that point, right? He had the option of continuing kind of doing what he was doing as a doctor and working in the war, or he had the option of going and fighting. And he said to my sister, there were hundreds and hundreds of people that chose the option of going to fight because they wanted the immediate result. They wanted to go out and they wanted to fight. They wanted to see that I'm doing something right now that is bringing about change. And he decided, I'm going to continue to practice as a medical doctor, and I might not see that immediate change. I'm not going to get revenge against the individuals that potentially blew up my house, but I am able to save lives. And so I think even when we're talking about the different issues, part of the difficulty in understanding extremism is a difficulty in understanding the psychology of the individuals that are attracted to it. And I think understanding this idea of immediate desire for change and helplessness is key. But again, there's still a mystery in the human psychology that's very difficult for us to kind of quantify and isolate.
I think that you've hit on a really important point, Soheira, that for many people, I think for most of us, violence is attractive because it seems to offer immediate results. It seems like you're getting something done now, whereas the whole long process of negotiation and working to do something good and the whole thing that way of relating that we sum up as dialogue seems to be kind of like so far off. You know, you don't see results in your own lifetime. So it's long-term results. And I think that for people who are feeling really passionate about any cause, that's not attractive. What's attractive is get it done now. You know, strike them down, do something to change things now. I've had this discussion so often. I can remember one time I was sitting down with a group of Tamils in Sri Lanka, and they were mostly Hindu and Christian by religion, but that wasn't the issue in that case. And they were just saying, you know, and I saying, I don't see how violence leads to any long-term social change. And they said, we can't wait that long. We're young and we want to see it in our lifetime. And if I could put a footnote onto that, they're all dead now. They died in the conflict. They went out in the Tigers and all of them are dead. But I think that part of the whole thing is patience is hard because it seems like you're just giving up. It seems like you're not taking it seriously. Seems like you're not really committed. And violence, it seems to be the opposite. Seems like it shows real commitment, shows real passion for the cause.
And I think I would add to that, historically, if we look at three figures who are really remembered as nonviolent resistance leaders, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, and Gandhi, all of them were resisted from within their own countries by people who were saying that your nonviolent methods are not going to bring the success and the changes that we desire, but you need to actually have violence. And so I think even if we step outside of religious extremism and we look at nonviolent leaders historically, we'll find that they were also resisted by other factions within society.
So what can religious leaders do to combat religious extremism within their ranks?
The first thing they have to know to do, in my opinion, is to get to know each other well. And this is the whole idea behind dialogue. When various religious leaders do know each other, when they can trust each other, when they can see each other as people who are good and want what's good for the common good, then they can work together. And when they do, we have concrete examples. If I had a lot of time, I would give you the example of Sierra Leone, where the religious leaders in the late 90s were the main ones to negotiate the peace settlement, which is still going on in Sierra Leone. In the Philippines, when the government and the MNLF came together finally with a peace agreement, it satisfied nobody. Christians say we're handing the country over to the Muslims. It's going to be Sharia law. It's going to be et cetera, et cetera. And the Muslims said, it's too little too late. It's just paper benefits. Benefits nobody except the civil servant. Nobody liked it. But the religious leaders said, if anybody is going to sell this agreement to the people, it's going to have to be us. And they're going to have to do it together. And they formed an association which is still going until today, which is meeting every 3 months. And they have discussed every aspect of life in the southern Philippines. And basically they said to the people, this peace agreement is, we agree, it's not a very good one, but it's the best we've got. And now they couldn't have done this. They couldn't have made this statement to sell it to the people unless they knew each other. I already gave the example of Indonesia, how the religious leaders who knew each other and had been in dialogue before were able to make a joint statement and prevent a lot of bloodshed in the country. But if they hadn't known each other, or if they had been leading the sectarianism as we've seen in other places, in Northern Ireland, in Bosnia, their religion, the religious leaders played basically a negative role in many cases. Well, I think that's possible too. What would you say, Sahira?
Well, I agree that I think that open dialogue and getting to know one another is important, but I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier, that religious extremism isn't just coming because of religion. So the religious leaders have their role to do in terms of sitting down and getting to know one another, but I think on a deeper level, we have to start addressing some of the political and social injustices you see in the world. And I think when we look at the different extremist organizations, we can even look at ISIS, for example, right now. They're establishing cancer centers, they're establishing hospitals, they're creating schools, they're fixing bridges, they're repairing electric problems in different cities. And so part of their appeal to individuals is also saying, all of these issues that your government was not solving, we are coming and solving. So if we actually want to combat religious extremism, I think religious leaders have a very important role to play. But I think as governments and as, especially foreign intervention and things like that, we have to start thinking about ways that we can actually alleviate political and social issues in the area. And the religious leaders can't take all of it on their shoulders, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're saying essentially is that in places where the state has failed, this is where religious extremism is most likely to occur?
Yeah, I think so. I think when there's intent, when the state has completely failed is definitely the most fruitful ground for it. But I think any place where you have gross injustice, any place where you have severe economic instability, severe social problems, severe poverty, I think all of those areas are places where we tend to find religious extremism.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the audience at this point?
There's somebody with his hand up.
Can you stand up and speak loudly so we can hear you?
Question for both panelists. I want to ask if either of you see secularism as a solution for religious extremism.
So the question is, do either of the panelists see secularism as a solution to religious extremism? Sahira?
I think I'll let Father Tom start with this one.
No, I don't see it, because as I said in my opening statement, I don't see religious extremism as something that's growing primarily out of theology, out of the content of religion. I see it as a reaction to a situation. I agree very much with the last thing that Sahira was saying. When people can't trust the government, when the government is not doing its job, when there is no justice in society, people look around for something in some ideology, some group, some movement that's going to bring these things which are so essential to people. I think unless these things are addressed, we're not going to be able to overcome religious extremism. But by just saying, let's have a completely secular society where religious commitment, religious belief, religious practice has nothing really to say in the political, social, and economic experience of people. I think that's missing the point that that's not going to solve problems. If it doesn't solve problems of injustice, if it doesn't solve the problems of an inefficacy in government, people are still going to be looking for something else. You can get a very secular experience, a secular attitude to life, and you can become a communist, Maoist. This is another alternative, but it's I don't know that it's a step forward from religious extremism to have secular extremisms.
I agree with Father Tom, and what I would also add to that is in the beginning we were kind of speaking about what some of the characteristics of religious extremism are, and we were saying intolerance, violence, the idea of absolutism in one's beliefs, and I don't think secularism is necessarily immune to those things. There's a great book that William Kavanaugh wrote about the myth of religious violence, and what he does is he compares secular governments and extremism within those governments, whether it comes to this idea of intolerance and also violence, and he compares that to religious extremism, and he shows that they're not necessarily all that different or all that far apart from one another. So I think when we're talking about what are the things that can be used to battle extremism and religious extremism, I think if you're coming and you're presenting secularism as an option, especially to one who finds a lot of comfort in their belief, I don't necessarily think that's going to be a paradigm that's going to be acceptable to them.
Other questions? Yes.
We both have this belief that religious extremism is a consequence of frustration felt by the neglected population.
I do, yes.
I think it definitely goes back to what you're saying, that there is a neglected population. But what Clyde was also alluding to earlier is that there is 200 people that went from Europe to fight with ISIS. And although that may be a negligible amount, if we look at all the Muslims, it's still a number, right? And so I think it's not just individuals who are living in a specific area and feeling the problems, but it's also, you're also going to have extremism if an individual feels a great sense of affinity or a great sense of connection to other individuals. So it could be individuals in that area, but a great example is ISIS right now, which is attracting people from all over. And a lot of the reasons that people are going is just because they feel an affinity or they feel a closeness or a sense of obligation or duty to these other individuals.
Right, and so the identity point that you made earlier is part of what draws them, right? That I am Sunni Muslim, whatever.
Exactly.
Now, you have both said that theology is not really the culprit here, but I hear Sohaira also say something about intolerance and about demonizing the other. And there are theological strands in both Christianity and Islam and also Hinduism that do, in fact, demonize the other. They become particularistic. We have the only true faith and everyone else is a heretic. So is theology at least part of this or not?
Well, I think what ends up happening is you have religious texts. I can speak obviously most comfortably about the Quran as opposed to Quran and Islam, so I'll leave Christianity to Father Tom. But in the Quran, you definitely have verses of the Quran that people who have extremist tendencies take out and they exploit, verses that you could potentially use for intolerance, verses that you could potentially use to justify violence. And I think that's where interpretation is so important, and that's why I think what Father Tom was saying is dialogue between scholars and between people within the same religious tradition is so important. Because if an individual is taking a specific verse and using that to argue for intolerance or to argue for violence, there could be a totally different interpretation of that. And in most cases, the verses that are used to promote intolerance and violence in the case of Islam are interpreted in a completely different way or contextualized in a completely different way than religious extremists do. So I think if we want to kind of address religious extremism from a religious perspective, it's going back to those texts that people are using and then discussing them. So that's where I think theology is very important.
Yeah, I think too, in Christian history, there's no doubt that religious extremists have used the Bible and have implied the tenets of faith for their purposes. They've selectively taken ideas and passages and words from their religious texts and from the tradition. Look at the Crusades. The Pope was saying God wills it. Well, now how did he know that? Or how did he come to that conclusion that God was the one who was directing him to call a crusade? We remember the white supremacists in South Africa. We're taking the narrative of the Old Testament of people given a promised land and having to cast out the people who were there before them, and God supporting them, and the Israelites against the Amalekites, and they were using this whole narrative of God has a chosen people, and God is giving the chosen people this land to be theirs. And so these very strongly Bible reading Dutch and to a lesser extent British settlers in South Africa were employing this biblical narrative to justify what they were doing, which was colonizing other people's land. So I think there's no doubt that by reading, there's some horrible passages really in the Bible if you want to focus on them. There's one where it says, take their babies and smash their heads against the stone, and you think, how did this sneak its way into a holy scripture? But I think that anybody, whether you be Muslim or Christian or Hindu or Jewish or whatever, you have to be training yourself to read your scriptures and your tradition in such a way that you're not taking phrases out of context and making them the justification for what you want to do for other reasons. You have to look at the whole sweep. And if you look at the sweep of the Quran, of the Bible, of other scriptures, you'll find that they're talking about a God who is just, a God who is merciful, and a God who is not vengeful and trying to destroy.
And other questions from the audience? So, yeah. You with the tie, yeah, right? So do the panelists think religious education would be a partial solution?
Yeah. I think definitely, the way children are taught is going to influence the way they're formed. But I'd like to take your question a step back further. I think the education that the children get at home is in a sense much more has a much stronger value of rooting than what they get at school. If children have learned from the time that they know how to talk and walk that God hates these Muslims or Jews or Hindus or Christians, then the children already are formed deeply before they set their first step in school. I think if we really want to work at forming people, let's see what the mothers mainly the mothers, they're the first teachers of all children. What the mothers are teaching their children, and also the fathers, what attitudes they're giving to people of other faiths. I think that's really a key thing to focus on.
I would agree. I think education at every level, starting from when you have children, is so key. And I also think dialogues like these are so important. I think oftentimes we end up shying away from talking about religious extremism or violence, what leads to it, what are its causes. I think oftentimes those discussions are not discussions that a lot of people are willing to have in forums like this. And I think from when you're a child to, even when you're an adult, when you're in university, any time is a good time to have these discussions because you don't know what ideas and what you're exposed to at what point in your life. So forums that are always open, challenging different ideas, I think is always key when it comes to battling different things.
Other questions? Yeah.
In nation states and countries and stuff, they'll have armies and armed forces. Do you think that religious factions or religious groups should be allowed to do the same without being labeled?
So countries have armies, maybe religious groups should have armies to protect themselves as well. Sorry?
I think nation states, the reason nation states have armies is also because they have borders, right? They're there to protect the borders. They're there to protect if a country invades if one country invades another country. And I think for the most part, religions don't necessarily have borders. You have over 1.8 billion Muslims living all over the world. So if there was to be a mini Muslim army in every single nation, it would be a bit scary, right? So I think when we're comparing nation states to religions, we're almost comparing two things that are very difficult to compare, because there's very, very few religions, if any religion I could even think of, where you could say all of the individuals live in one place and those people need to be protected. So I think it would be quite problematic. I'm also a pretty nonviolent person, so I don't like militaries in the first place, so.
I can't think of any example, judging from Christian experience, I can't think of even one example where you have a Christian military or paramilitary that is not extremist. I think peace-loving Christians just wouldn't be part of that. When I think of the paramilitaries that exists among Christian groups, the Serbs or again North Africa, they're all extremists. I think it's by the nature of it. People who are not extremists want to find another solution than violence. Don't want to do it a violent way. So no, I would have to say no from what I know of Christian experience.
My thought on that is that armies are always used, right? So if you have armies, you're going to go to war. But imagine a different scenario where you have armies of, say, young religious volunteers trying to rebuild places together, getting to know one another. That's a different story. Other questions? Yes.
Don't you think militants such as ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Taliban are originated from a sense of hunger and revenge towards the Western military policies?
So the question is, are ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the Taliban resulting in anger towards Western military policies?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I think Western intervention, like if you read the writings of bin Laden, and if you read the current writings of ISIS, I think a lot of it is directed with anger towards the West, in terms of their military policies, in terms of their presence in the region. So if you take the example of Iraq, the last president to not declare some type of war in Iraq was Ronald Reagan. So for 24 years, you're talking about some type of Western military action taking place in Iraq. So I think you're completely right to look at Western intervention and Western presence in the region as being an important factor. But I also would argue that there are other factors. Western presence has definitely destabilized the area, but the presence of dictators, the absence of social welfare institutions, all of these things are also creating a lot of anger in the hearts and minds of individuals.
But I think that what you say is really important. We can analyze all the other factors in a conflict. And if we don't include the factor of anger at Western, particularly American hegemony, then I think we're not going to really get at the heart of what's going on.
Okay, we have time for a couple more, yeah? Right. So the question is that if extremism comes from frustration, as this last question also implied, then maybe it's not religion at all as a source. Maybe religion is a tool of mobilization or a way to, justify your anger. Yeah.
I think it is. I think it's both. It's a way to justify your anger when you give a religious coloring to the anger and frustration that you have. It's almost like saying, well, God is on our side. It's not just my feelings of anger, but I'm acting not only in my own name, but I'm acting in the name of God. And so I think definitely that is there as a justification. And also, religion is a way to mobilize people. It's a way to really stir people up for a cause, to get people again, the reason is if you're doing this for God, which is the religious connection tells you, then it's more than yourselves. Then also you're getting strength beyond yourself. And so I think it is a very powerful agent for mobilization.
Yeah, I don't think there's much I can add there. I think religion is probably the strongest tool you have for mobilization. We live in an era of nation states where people are divided based on what country they're from. They're divided based on what language they speak, all of these different things. But one thing that, for example, 1.8 billion Muslims have in common is the fact that they're all united around religion. So all of a sudden, the importance of the nation state and the boundaries and your citizenship, all of a sudden, those things start to erode. So if you want to create some type of movement, right? The way to create a movement that could spread internationally, that could spread globally is through religion, which is why, again, you have those 200 people going from Europe all the way to Iraq or to Syria to fight. It's religion that's taking them there more than it is some ethnic policy.
Well, I've just got the signal that we've got about 2 minutes left, so would each of you like to have 1 minute of final comments?
So, you want to go? Tom? Yeah?
I'd like to hear the final question.
Okay.
I understand that the idea of anger caused by racism is very much present, but maybe, as a result of sensitivity, as a result of vulnerability and religion, causes the Western forces to use this to ignite anger, and that's where my issue comes with religion, in that maybe secularism is the only option, because this anger results in the misinterpretation of the text. And so I'm wondering what you guys think, because of the idea of secularism you disagree with, but at the same time, how can members not be secular if we see again, time and time again, that religion or is being completely associated with religion? And that's where I have to I don't know what we should do for
Well, where I would disagree with secularism is that it's not religions that are the problem. It's a very peculiar selective interpretation of a religious tradition that causes that leads to extremism and causes violence. But I'd much rather put my trust in the vast numbers of Muslims and Christians and Jews and Buddhists that, because of their religion and because of their understanding of religion, are opposed to extremism, are in fact in favor of living together and bringing peace to the world. And I think that we can come up with empirical evidence that when Muslims and Christians and Jews and others work together for peace, they can be one of the most effective factors in society. That's where I'd really like to put my commitment.
I think I understand where your frustrations are coming from, and I think a lot of people voice those same frustrations, but I think it's important to separate the religion from religious extremism. And I think the problem with imposing secularism is that you're imposing something that has completely Western roots and has a very clear development in Western intellectual history, and you're imposing that upon groups of people that potentially don't have that same history. And that itself will end up creating a new type of extremism, which is, of course, not what we want to do. So I think, having forums, trying to bring about social change, trying to bring about economic change, all of these things, I think, are a lot better than just trying to say, let's impose a secular government. If you take two examples, you take the example of Turkey, they secularized, and then you had the EKP party that's ruled Turkey for almost 15 years or longer now, and they're a moderately religious party, and you don't necessarily associate Turkey with religious extremism. Another example is you have the Tunisian Revolution, and after that, once again, they elected a moderately religious party. And both cases show that there is possibility for you to have moderate religious governments that are there, that aren't completely secular and that don't necessarily leave a lot of room for religious extremism. But you also have to notice that the economic, the social, and the political policies of both Turkey and Tunisia do not mirror that of Syria, Iraq, or the other places that we're seeing extremism. So is secularism the answer? No. Is imposing secularism going to even produce more religious extremism? I would probably say yes.
Okay, I think we're out of time, so I want to thank my two panelists, and I want to thank the audience for some good questions.
Viajei pensando nela, a saudade me apertou. Eu sei, quero voltar. O sol beijando aquela areia, que saudade arpoador. Sonhei, quero voar. As noites morenas nos bares de Ipanema, o sol adormece nos dois irmãos. I love you, Ipanema, e sonhos que eu vivi. A melodia veio lembrando o tom. Viajei pensando nela, a saudade me apertou. Eu sei, quero voltar. Vejo o sol beijando aquela areia, que saudade arpoador. Sonhei, quero voar. As noites morenas nos mares de Ipanema, o sol adormece nos dois irmãos. I love you, Ipanema, e sonhos que eu vivi. A melodia veio lembrando todos ouvidos. I love you, Ipanema, e sonhos que eu vivi. Eu voltaria sempre pensando em que eu vivi. I love you, Ipanema, e sonhos que eu vivi. A melodia veio lembrando todos os ouvintes. I love you, Ipanema, e sonhos que eu vivi. A melodia veio lembrando todos os ouvintes. I love Ma mère a lu des feuilles de thé et a fait une révérence à la nouvelle lune. Elle a été une chercheuse de vérité et maintenant, ainsi est moi, ainsi est moi, ainsi est moi. Honorer la terre, le cycle des saisons. Observer les nuages au pays s'élevant. Croyez-vous les lecteurs de feuillets de thé? Êtes-vous un chercheur de la vérité? Mais c'est le monde plus grand. Vous traversez au violon de la lune. Foncez, allumez une bougie, puis fermez vos yeux. Écoutez le silence, enlève tout le peur. Comptez sur les grandes lois de l'univers. Et vous serez très sûr, toujours bien que mer. Laissez le monde plus grand. Vous traversez au violon de la lune. Foncez, je voyagerai avec les vents de nord, jusqu'à ce que je teigne finalement le fait des morts. Et je compterai sur un sujet secret intime, tellement souvent dit dans la légende, l'histoire et le mythe. Laissez le monde plus grand. Vous traversez au violon de la lune. Foncez, laissez le monde plus grand. Vous traversez au violon de la lune. Foncez. La lune, foncez, honorer l'éternel cycle des saisons. Observer les nuages. La lune, foncez, saisissez le vent. Croyez-vous les lecteurs de feuillets de thé? La lune, foncez. Êtes-vous un chercheur de la vérité?
Mind control. Future shock. Corruption. Scandal. Deception. What does it mean? What does it mean? Expand.
Celebrating to mesmerize, expand your mind. Celebrating shine. You my girl. Celebrate to mesmerize, expand your mind. Celebrating to mesmerize, expand your mind. Celebrating shine. You my girl. Celebrate to mesmerize, expand your mind. Expand your
These questions.
sentimental journey. It's unreal to me. There's so much that I see when I'm with you, baby. But how can you feel the same as I feel the desire burning inside?
I don't know, suggested. I think you should sit with me because you're going to talk about
Why don't you pull it to like one?
Okay, folks, we'll go ahead and get started in just a minute. As a few more people are entering, I'm going to grab.
Or did you grab the microphone? They'll probably do a
Should I grab that?
shipping.
Or we can just.
You don't have a pen, do you? Don't want feedback.
Oh, I like the fact you're all together. because everyone was spread out in the. Yeah, I like that. Okay, folks, if you want to take a seat as you enter, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm really excited to offer this particular panel discussion. Every year at the QLC, there has always been a panel discussion devoted to MUN. And the idea for this actually once again started at the first QLC. The panel was moderated by Cameron Jansen, and a lot of issues were brought up about the future of MUN, what it looks like, who's participating, the role of big organizations coming in and doing MUN for profit, all different kinds of things were brought up. And so a seed was planted amongst a couple of us about having a discussion about, is Model United Nations an accurate simulation of the UN? Yes or no? And if it's not, is that okay? All right, so there are a number of questions that can be drawn out of that. So I've asked 4 people who have different experiences with Model United Nations to come and discuss this issue, and also to be open to your questions regarding what MUN is and how closely it should resemble the United Nations itself. So we're going to start with KFC first and go down the line. I'm going to ask people to introduce themselves and a little bit of their background and philosophy. And once they've done that, we will open with some questions. Okay, thank you, Kevin.
Hi, my name is Kevin Felix Chan, so that's why she calls me KFC. And I work for an organization called Best Delegate. We are a Model United Nations training and resources organization. And so we run summer programs throughout the United States. We run training programs and workshops in more than 20 countries. And we also run the website bestdelegate.com that receives over 500,000 readers each year. And so our goal is to help support teachers and students to succeed in Model UN worldwide. Because we do Model UN in so many different places, we've encountered Model UN being done differently in many places. And so primarily, we train now in 3 types of procedures. One is called North American procedure, which is what's used throughout the Americas. The other one's called Thyman procedure, which is what's used throughout Europe, Middle East, Africa, and parts of Asia. And then the other one is the new one called UN for MUN procedure, which is how the UN actually simulates their, how the UN actually works in real life. And so we teach all 3. So that's what I do. And so I have experiences doing all 3. I can see kind of the pros and cons of all of them. My own background is that I graduated from UCLA, did Model UN there, and I also volunteered with the United Nations Association of the USA throughout undergrad and served as Secretary General of their conference at UN headquarters.
Thanks. My name's Kristen Rowe. I'm working at Taipei American School and I've been there for 11 years. And prior to that, I was also working in East Asia with MUN programs delivered through a variety of mediums, such as summer academy programs, embedded in the curriculum as electives, and at Taipei American School as an extracurricular activity that has grown enormously in the last 6 or 7 years. I'm the middle school MUN coordinator. I work together with an upper school MUN coordinator who's here in the audience, Darby Sinclair. And there is another form of MUN delivery, I suppose we could say, that I've more recently become involved with, and that's Thyman Online MUN. And that's an area that I'll be talking about a little bit too in relation to the topic today. So we're very grateful to be here for the 3rd time. With a group of students this time, and that too is something I'd like to bring up a little later on.
My name's Frances Loughlin, and I'm here representing the Thyman Foundation, which is based in The Hague and which has links with conferences all over the world, and works on the model that Kevin was just talking about. I'm also, until about 6 weeks ago, an MUN director at the British School in the Netherlands. So I see it from both sides. I see the organisational side, but I also see what it's like being an MUN director and working with delegates, working with students. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what Thyman is and what it isn't.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bill Yodov. I'm the project manager of something called the Global Teaching and Learning Project in the United Nations. So I work at UN headquarters in New York. This is my first time at the QLC Leadership Conference, and I want to say it's been a really fantastic experience, and I want to thank Lisa for making it possible for me to be here. The UN only became actively involved in supporting Model UN programs around the world starting in 2009. Prior to that, the earliest record I've been able to find of a Model UN simulation goes back to 1949 at a university in the United States called Rutgers University. And from 1949 up until recently in 2009, Model UN programs have developed all around the world at all educational levels without any real input from the United Nations. Although we have received many requests over time from programs for information, for speakers, and it's through that experience in going to Model UN programs that we saw that there is a great difference between the way Model UN has evolved and the way that the UN actually functions. There is a great convergence between Model UN and the UN on a substantive level in terms of the issues that it looks at are very much the kinds of issues on the UN agenda. So there's, at that level, there's a great deal of convergence. Where there's a great deal of divergence, however, is when you start looking at the procedural level. The rules of procedure are very different in Model UN than they are at the real United Nations. Model UN programs use parliamentary rules of procedure. The UN does not, and we'll get into that a little bit. And then in terms of the process, the way the decisions are made at the UN often diverges from the way decisions are made in Model UN programs. So we're going to be talking about that.
Thank you. The structure of this is I've come up with 4 questions and a little self-serving. These are questions that I've been thinking about over the past year or so, but they each address kind of different areas and possibly one for each of our panelists. And so I'm going to throw out a question and allow for a brief response, but then also to allow our panelists to kind of question and comment on what others are saying. We will allow plenty of time at the end for question and answers, so if there's a particular issue that comes up and we have to move on, we can address that again, say in the last 15 minutes of this. So my first question is, this is kind of the $20 million question, and I'm going to throw it to Bill. That the UN has at times proven to be very ineffective in its mission and what it states to be about and things it needs to accomplish. So my question is, why should we model what the United Nations actually does when the United Nations itself maybe isn't the most effective organization? Why should we follow a different set of procedures?
Lucky me. It's a great question and a hard question to answer, of course. It's one we get often with the UN in terms of, is the UN still relevant? And that question, of course, is connected and linked to the question you're asking, is if the UN is not very effective or it's not very relevant today, should we be concerned about how accurate we're simulating it? The short answer, because we could have a long answer, obviously, we can go on for a long time. The short answer is I think that, yes, it does matter. The UN, as has been pointed out in other talks, has failed many times in many situations. As Peter had pointed out in his talk, particularly marginalized groups have been failed by the UN over time. The point is, I think that it is the only intergovernmental organization that we have, and I think that we need, in addition to its failures, it also has done enormous good in the world. And it's the only intergovernmental body that we really have to address the global issues that we all face. We are living in an era where the world is more interdependent. No one country can face solutions to the global issues that we're facing. The Ebola crisis is a great example right now. In the modern world where we travel very quickly from one part of the world to the other in the flash, very quickly things spread in ways that they never spread before. And so a lot of the issues, many of the issues, most of the issues are really transnational, transboundary. And so they require an international response. And the UN is the only entity that we have that can really address these issues. So it's important because of that we have a deep understanding of how it functions. And as I pointed out, the area where there's great divergence between model UN and the actual UN is in procedural matters. I think, model UN, as I said, has been going on since 1949, and it's done no great harm all these years by following rules of procedure that aren't used at the UN at all. So you could ask, does it really matter? And I think that it does. I think if we look at the purpose of education, which is to impart knowledge. And if you look at the rules, parliamentary rules, the UN is not a parliament. And as such, many of the rules of procedure violate the sovereign rights of nations. This is something that is not well understood. So just on the level of, on an educational level, and in terms of imparting knowledge, we're failing on that level to communicate things about the UN by using inappropriate rules of procedure. Maybe if I could make an analogy, if we were teaching a course on Shakespeare's poetry, and we happened to use the poems of another writer instead, and you didn't know it wasn't Shakespeare, but you were studying that poetry, would that be acceptable on an educational level? If students were still learning something, they were still learning something about poetry, maybe they're still improving their skills in writing, but I don't think it's something that we would accept once we found out that we weren't actually studying the poems of who we said that we were studying. So I think there's some kind of analogy we can make with what we're doing with Model UN and using procedures that are totally inappropriate for an intergovernmental body that is not a parliament. So I'll stop there. I have other things, but perhaps it'll come up.
Would any of our panelists like to comment on that?
Two comments. Firstly, on what you were saying about the UN being famous for not having succeeded. It's the glamour, the big glamour issues that are discussed by the media, but there is an enormous amount of work that goes on very quietly that isn't reported and is very much part of the UN, the UN's mission and the things that are decided in the UN. So that's one thing. The other thing is about the rules of procedure and the formality of MUN. It may not be exactly what happens in the UN, but what MUN does is a wider thing than just learning about the UN, and you're working with students, not professional diplomats. And what the formal language and the formal structure gives you is a structure in which you can discuss some very, very difficult issues sometimes, and a language that you can use to discuss them without ending up screaming at each other. As I say, then people who do MUN are not trained diplomats who do use formal language with each other sometimes. They're students who are sometimes struggling to manage really, really hard, emotionally hard, or intellectually hard issues, and that formality gives them a structure, a bubble, if you like, within which to talk about these things.
I just have one comment on this, and it's more from a philosophy perspective when teaching Model UN is, do we want to be teaching the students how the world is or how it should be? Right? And for me, having taught two different styles of Model UN, I think it would be a disservice to students to not be able to teach both. Right? Students should be learning how the world is and how the world should be. And most Model UN conferences seem to simulate how it should be by having unlimited funding or all these creative solutions. I see people nodding their heads in the audience, and that's great. That instills idealism amongst ourselves to do something about the issues in the world. At the same time, if they're going to actually enter the world, they need to understand the real side of the UN and the challenges and complexities and how it actually functions, so that they don't apply the skills inaccurately, right? So I think for students, we should be teaching a balance of both so that they can understand how to make a difference, but at the same time to do it realistically within the parameters of what's set up in the international institutions, which is first and foremost the United Nations.
I'm going to interject the next question and put the spotlight on Kevin, because we know the role of best delegate has been, well, I'm not going to, here's my question. Many MUNs are intensely competitive, and we have out there, even in Doha, right? We have MUN programs and conferences where it's like MUN as a blood sport, right? It's rankings and it's best and sabotage, and this has been well documented on Best Delegate's website. So Kevin, rankings and the competitive nature of MUN seems to fly in the face of the UN for MUN philosophy. And I'm wondering if you have any comments on that dichotomy and that tension.
Yes, so I think there are three things that contribute to why Model UN can be perceived as competitive. One is just the simple structure of how the activity is created. In all Model UNs right now, you have a limited number of sponsors or main submitters. Just because you limit the number of leadership positions, you will get people who want to rise to the top and become those leaders. Because Model UN currently also uses simple majority voting, you will get two competitive blocks who are trying to capture votes from each other. It's very zero sum in the room, right? And just the whole rising up the leadership positions of having limited chairing positions, limited secretariat positions, everyone wants to work their way up. How do you stand out in committee and as a leader in your Model UN organization? Everyone's going to want to compete to get to those spots. It's just natural to, when you have limited number of resources available, that people will want to seek those resources. I think that's one reason why it's competitive. It's just structured that way. Second thing is, some conferences layer on top awards, right? And this exists everywhere. Even amongst some conferences that use diamond procedure, I've seen them also give out awards. And so awards will obviously make it more competitive because you also have limited number of resources that you're fighting for. I have done simulations using the UN for MUN procedure where we gave out awards, but the difference is we only gave out one tier of award called the Diplomacy Award for those who did the best in terms of building consensus. So it's a little bit different, but awards are independent, I think, of the MUN procedure. It can be applied or not applied to any of the procedures that exist, right? And the third thing I think that's bigger is how people are taught international relations. For those who study political science in university, you're taught either something called realism or liberalism. Realism meaning states fight for their own survival, and liberalism meaning states use international institutions for survival. And at least in the United States, most professors teach realism, and that the United States should go about its own way to solve issues. And because of that, students are trained from a very realistic perspective. As my own country, we need to defend our country policy and lobby for what we want first and foremost, rather than the greater good of the international community. So I think these are the three reasons: structure, awards, and the international relations theories that guide competitiveness in Model UN.
I'm wondering if the teacher, the official teacher on the panel, Kristen, if you would like to address that issue of competition.
Kevin's brought up some very interesting points there that we've talked about before. And I guess to keep this very personal, because I'm not an expert as many of the other panelists are on their field, but rather I have a group of amazing students that are very fired up about MUN. I'd like to mention some of the things that more recently they have become particularly passionate about. And I'm interested that it's, in fact, those very things that speak to the convergence of Model UN and the spirit of UN, and very much the spirit of the way the GA works to empower everybody in the room, such that even at the leadership level, though there are a small number of leadership positions, the culture of leadership is one of service, that group is elected and that the people with particular expertise are actually the guides on the side. And this is a very personal response from me because I'm very interested in developing mentoring networks, and this has been an approach that we've adopted very intentionally in our MUN program to shift the culture of leadership from one of the power rush of wielding the gavel, though that's still there, to one of service leadership and paying it forward. It's a bit of a catchphrase at our school that if you get an opportunity, you need to give an opportunity, and that those with the greatest opportunities are those that are serving the greatest number of students as well. And so if I speak to some of those things that are firing them up, it's actually not the competitive side of things, but rather the collaborative side of things and the outreach side of things. For example, this year at Thyme The Hague, a new advisory panel was introduced, the National Security Summit. And what made this one particularly special, beyond the clause-by-clause debate and the idea of a single resolution or a joint communique being the result of that debate, was the idea of consensus, that this was to be a resolution adopted by consensus. And one of our students had the opportunity to observe some of that and took what he had learned to the next conference that he attended as a president at another school. And he worked with the leaders, the secretariat of that school, who had also been leaders at Thyme The Hague, to replicate that experience of consensus building. And the drive was not to recreate the competitive debate, but the competition was almost, can we do this thing together? And there was great reward in being able to achieve that. Now that leader is the Secretary General of our own conference at Taipei American School, and some of the discussion amongst the executive team is how can we bring that model of consensus building into our conference as well. So that's one example of students being fired up in MUN, not by something that's competitive, but ultimately collaborative. And then the second thing I wanted to bring up was online MUN, and particularly what I'm more involved with, which is junior online MUN, where once again we see that the leaders are the guides on the side, that we follow a process whereby students work on a monthly debate cycle. They introduce themselves on Edmodo, a social networking site that teachers are monitoring. They get to know each other by their interests first. They know each other as individuals before they know each other as country representatives. Then they share the research links, they share what they're finding out about the topic. Then they move into country research and putting their policy statements out there. And on this Edmodo platform, they're continuing to collaborate and discuss together prior to the debate. And meanwhile, the mentors are supporting them in developing their ideas and encouraging and facilitating the conversation, so that by the time they come to debate, there's been a collaborative culture already that's developed. And then they come back again to Edmodo to continue the conversation after the traditional debate, which we normally think about as that's MUN. And then many of them roll over right into the very next month to work together again, albeit perhaps as a different country, but nevertheless with that same culture going deeper each time of collaboration. So I see that both our students that have worked at the mentoring end and our students that have worked as the young middle school students who are entering MUN with this experience, feeling very supported and finding themselves not knowing it, but moving towards this spirit of the UN that I think you're talking about.
If I could just add a couple of things quickly. Just building on what both of you have said, the approach, the UN for MUN approach, puts the consensus building process at the core of the decision-making process. And one of the things that I found in talking to groups around the world that's least understood about how the UN has evolved is then there's been the shift now towards consensus where we've reached a point where 80% of the decisions that are made at the UN are made by consensus, which means resolutions are adopted without a vote. It means that the negotiation process is much longer, is much more arduous, but the negotiation process is one in which people are putting more time and effort into finding out how the other thinks and feels and to talk. It's more inclusive because you have to find out, in order to reach consensus, you have to concentrate on how everyone feels about an issue, not just how a simple majority feels, because a simple majority under the old system is all you needed to adopt a resolution. The other thing that's important, and then I'll end, is that in order to support this consensus building process, we've added a layer where we appoint facilitators during the negotiation process. And this is something, without that, it's often very difficult to reach consensus. Facilitators could be the vice presidents, it could be a chair of a committee, who intercede in the negotiations when delegates get stuck, when they can't move past their differences. And this has really changed that whole process. And it's actually made it more interesting for the student delegates because they feel more involved in ways that they haven't under the old system.
Can I just briefly represent Thymon's view?
Yeah.
Thymon is very focused on the initial stages of passing the resolution, if you like. Students spend weeks preparing, researching. They write a resolution. So if there are 3,000 plus students at Thymon, you'll have hundreds of resolutions. And there's a lot of focus on that preparation stage, but also on the lobbying stage. And we'd spend more than a day lobbying. We are committed to the consensus viewpoint. It's perhaps not practicable with 3,500 students to do it your way, and we don't have time. Consensus is what we're looking at, and those three stages. The debate is only one of three stages, and that does allow students who have different skills all to be able to participate, the ones who have enormous knowledge, the ones who are the really good negotiators, and the ones who are the star debaters. And I think that's one of the differences between the American model that you were talking about. But we are very interested in this model.
And I'll also just speak, and we're going to open it up to questions here. I will also speak in the development of the online program. The junior OMUN program has been particularly interesting in that the focus has been on mentoring, but driven primarily through social media and pretty organically, this kind of discussion and some tools, online tools, being used so that that collaboration and discussion can happen prior to actual debating, I think fits very much in that philosophy. And I think there are a lot of tools out there that educators and students can use to facilitate discussion well ahead of time. So if you are looking at the constraints of time within a particular committee or session, you're able to bring that collaborative spirit very early on into the process, which I think is important. One last question, and any of you can answer. Fran, you kind of touched on one of the key questions, but in your opinion, all of you, do you think students are aware the degree to which their MUN experience is possibly straying from what the UN is actually doing? Is that something we should be mindful of? I think probably there may be consensus or not. If you'd like to briefly touch on that, and then we'll open it up to some questions.
I'm not sure whether students actually worry about that at all. They're very focused on the MUN experience, whatever kind of MUN experience, and perhaps during their research they will find that the UN does it slightly differently, but the issues are the same, the concerns are the same, the proposals for prevention of some of these things are very similar, and that's what they're really focused on.
Are there any questions from the audience? Yes.
You guys mentioned consensus and how the UN turns towards consensus decision-making over simple decisions, right? When it comes to weighing, as you mentioned, between what the world should do versus what the world is doing,
Are you talking about Model UN or the UN itself? Okay, so one of the things that's important to understand that we didn't get a chance to talk about is why consensus building has become so important at the UN. The reason why it's become so important is because the UN has realized that under the old system, where things were decided by an up and down vote and the majority got their way and those that voted against, but they were in the minority, didn't, were less likely to be implemented at the national level. So you have the situation where you have, it could be a sizable group of countries that feel excluded from a decision that was made because they happen to be in the minority that voted against. And so this model towards consensus building, where you have to get all 193 countries today in agreement on a text, has meant that there's a greater likelihood that those member states will actually implement the actions that are recommended in a resolution than it was true under the old system. So this is why the UN has moved towards consensus building and why it's been so important. And it's something to groups of students around the world that they're completely unaware that the UN is so consensus driven. Most model UNs that I have experience with are still doing it under the old way, where they're vote. It doesn't mean that they haven't had any experience with consensus, but the majority of decisions are still made by voting, whereas at the UN, voting happens only 20% of the time in adopting resolutions. So it's important to understand why that system has evolved and why it's so important. I don't know if I answered your question, but.
Follow-up? Follow-up is granted.
Request the follow-up.
What I really want to ask is there is examples in history of governments that are just launched on democracy that have implemented governments where they want full consensus for decisions to be passed. Though it is not really good way to do things, those governments have failed miserably because they couldn't get anything done on efficiency with drop of money. Just because one country decided not, or one delegation, or a number of parliaments decided not to agree because of their own personal beliefs. Nothing can be carried out for the greater good of the world. And so what I'm trying to ask is, when it comes to consensus building in the UN and the model organization, would it be for what the world should be more versus what the world is more, and whether or not it leads to whichever end should we implement?
It's a very complex question. There's this balance in the consensus building model. Obviously, when you have 193 countries trying to come to agreement on a text, there are going to be some things which are lost, some things that are dropped out of compromise. Sometimes resolutions are watered down because of that process. But on the other hand, you have to weigh against the likelihood that the actions that are recommended are going to be implemented or not on the national level. And what is true that when you simply vote and the majority rules, then you may be in a situation where you get a sizable number of countries that aren't going to do very much at all on an issue. So it weigh the balance, which results in the greater good. Having more countries implementing the actions, or having a resolution that you might be on the side thinking represents your point of view, but there's a whole that feel left out and excluded from that decision-making process. So again, there are pros and cons, and it's really finding a balance. And it is the case that sometimes resolutions may be too watered down and too much has been lost, and that does happen. But I think that's a part of the process.
Yes.
I'm actually a teacher and an instructor, and my students have constantly asked me the same question that goes to the UN. And after you model the UN and know the UN, they feel that the UN's relevance is kind of going away. They say there's so much talk and so much debate, but there's actually no action. And that there should be more action as a result of these resolutions, and it's just, what is the UN doing? They're discussing and having straight things, then nothing is happening.
This is a question that I raised in my first talk at this conference, and that is because the General Assembly that the resolutions adopted in the General Assembly only have the status of being recommendations, which means there's no way to enforce them, unlike the Security Council, where they have the power. It doesn't mean, not all the resolutions of the Security Council are legally binding, only if they want it to be legally binding. But the Security Council has the power to make resolutions legally binding on all member states. General Assembly does not have that power. And so the question is, how can the General Assembly still have an impact on people's lives when its actions are only recommendations? There's only words on pieces of paper. And this is where the consensus building model has come in and has found that by focusing more on consensus building, by focusing more on this inclusive process where member states are engaging more in a dialogue to understand each other and to reach agreement, that more good is coming out of it and more impact is occurring in people's lives. So it may be hard for students to see, it may appear to them that it's just talk, 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 and sometimes it is. But it is the case that particularly since the 90s, when there's been such a heavy focus on development, the Millennium Development Goals is a good example, things are being done, and I believe the consensus building model is having a greater impact on people's lives. So, there are other things to point to as well that we could talk privately where I can show you that there's evidence that impact is being achieved.
Do you think it's safe to say that maybe as MUN directors, we have a much greater responsibility in more accurately informing our students as to what is actually happening in terms of the actions of the UN, and that a lot of it is quite unglamorous, but that is really where a bulk of the work is happening?
Yeah, and just quickly, and I'll give it to Kevin. I have with me these everyday cards, which give 10 examples of the impact that the UN is having on a regular basis on people's lives. So you're free to take as many of those that you want with you.
I think I'll add something that Bill mentioned in his previous workshop, which is most model UN simulations right now don't actually simulate the implementation process. But in the UN for MUN procedure, implementation is only step 4 out of 5. So we're not teaching that to students, so they feel like I'm just making these resolutions and then what happens to it afterward, right? So I think there's more in the simulation that can be captured somehow, and that way students understand that the UN actually has all these other programs and funds and all these support from NGOs and other things that do things beyond what you just hear in the news, which is usually like negative.
Any questions?
Okay, so this is the same question that was asked in the very beginning in terms of the relevance. I can come up with lots of examples also where the UN has failed. I think it's important for people to understand that the UN is a body that's made up of members, different members. So people very often talk about the UN as if it's this separate entity from the member states. The effectiveness of the UN is only as effective as the members, the political will of the members that make up the UN. And sometimes they come together and sometimes they don't. But I have this card here, which gives you, I can read them off, I'm not going to spend time now, just the actions that are done on a regular basis that we don't hear about in the news that are making a difference in people's lives all over the world. And if you've lived in a country where you've ever benefited from it, it's something which is real to you. So I can only say to you that I could find, for every example you can give me of a failure, I can give you examples where we've helped people. So, as I said, we are facing on this planet global issues that none of us can solve on our own. The only way we're going to be able to solve them is through cooperation and partnerships. And the UN is the only intergovernmental body that we have. So we have to make it function, and we have to hold our leaders accountable. But to complete the other option is to disband the UN, and I think that we would not, I think the world would be less safe if we did that. That's as best as I can say.
Could I ask Fran actually to address this, and maybe this is kind of our final comment, that, why have MUN? And I know the Thyman Foundation feels very strongly that we should, and has invested a lot of time and energy and effort into making sure that Thyman is a quality educational opportunity. Why do we need MUN? Why does it matter?
Part of it is an answer to the previous question as well. You said, why do MUN if the UN isn't working at all? But actually, the people sitting in this room, the people who come to MUN conferences, young people, have optimism and ideals. And I think it's really important that that should be given a voice, and not saying, oh, well, not to be cynical at that stage and say it's not going to work, no point discussing it. And there are so many students who go on in their careers, in their lives, to actually make changes, to make things better. I'm an optimist in this way, and I think things can get better. And I think one of the ways that things do get better is through this learning process and working with students, working with young people. I also think that, all right, you asked me about Thyman, the fact that people talk to each other. I've heard a lot this week about dialogue. And people, the importance of people actually talking together and being together. And I think if you can, that's a really important part of it. And it's also the idea, which is in all MUNs, of stepping into somebody else's shoes, walking around in their skin. I think it's a quote from To Kill a Mockingbird, which a lot of you will have read. To understand how other people think, to actually, when you go to a conference, when you're lobbying, to say, actually, I know you agree with me. I want to go and talk to the people who don't agree with me. And this is something that you've said already and that I've heard in workshops. And MUN just provides that, that forum, that place to do it. And Thyman is very keen to promote this, this dialogue. Through, to say, our rules are quite formal, and I think they'll probably stay that way, but we are looking at other models and other issues, other committees. There's the Nuclear Security Summit, there are ICJ models. I've been to a committee on the peaceful uses of outer space, different issues, different committees, different ways of working, but they're all doing the same thing. And we're all, as we go on, learning about what the UN could do and what we could do.
Kevin, or any final quick comments?
Just one comment to throw back to the audience, right? The people who are at the real UN today did not get a chance to do Model UN when they were growing up. So if you look down the line 20, 30 years from now, when you are in that position, do you want the world to be as it is today? Or do you want the world to be like how you do your Model UN simulations and make it much more diplomatic and better the way that you learned it, right? I think that's why we do Model UN. We know we want to figure out how we want the world to be in the future, and then we get to that point where we can make it the way that we learned it.
One quick comment. I mean, we talk about the UN has failed, hasn't, we're leaving out a big part of this. The UN cannot do this by itself. I talked about the importance of partnerships, and one of the most important partnerships is civil society. You're a part of civil society. So the Secretary General has made youth one of his top priorities because he realizes the power and enthusiasm of young people. He said, young people are not the future leaders of tomorrow, they're the leaders of today. So you need to become involved in these issues and make a difference and work with the UN or work with NGOs. It's not just the UN by itself that's going to be able to solve these problems.
And that leads into my last plug, sorry, again, for why we're doing this survey. Because if MUN is about being impactful and to how the UN works, but it's about how people work together. And I think for all of us who've been doing MUN for a long time and have made a lot of sacrifices to promote MUN, I think that's what we hope happens, and I hope that that's what students are getting out of it. But one way to know for sure is, again, fill out this survey and pass it on to people who have done the MUN, and preferably if they're older, you know, like over 20 or something. You know, get some old people to do this because it's been around for a while. I know, I had to say that. The great thing about this is because we were in the auditorium for this, this is being streamed and we will have a recording of this. And I actually think this is a really, really important discussion that we've had. It's a great way to kind of wrap up the MUN part of the Qatar Leadership Conference. This will be available online. People are watching it online now, according to what I'm being told. And you can go back also and see the recording if you'd like to. On behalf of the Thyman Qatar office, I really would like to thank all of our panelists. They represent a very important part of where MUN is and is heading, and we appreciate your thoughts on this, and maybe we'll do it again next year. Thank you. If you are sitting here and you're comfortable, you do not need to move because all this is quickly coming to an end, and we will be starting our closing ceremonies at 12:10.
That works.
Should we let the admin